Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Iron Claw, starring Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, Harris Dickinson, Moira Tierney, Stanley Simons, Holt McCallany, and Lily James, directed by Sean Durkin. Now, before I get into this, I do remember going to see this in theaters in an early access screening and was pretty impressed with it. But how impressed was I? That's for this show to figure that out. Let's get into it. This is inspired by a true story taking place from the 1980s, maybe 70s and 80s, where we start with, somewhere in the 1960s, when we get a young Fritz von Erich, played by Holt McCallany, winning a wrestling match in black and white, as well as buying a fancy car and a house in a safe place with his wife Doris, played by Maura Tierney, and their young kids Kevin and David. And we move on to 1979, where Kevin and David are fully grown, and Kevin is played by Zac Efron, and David is played by Harris Dickinson, as they love wrestling and do it themselves. As we start seeing it, so in Dallas, Texas, with Kevin getting support from Fritz helping him out, as Kevin wins the match and becomes the Texas Heavyweight Champion of the world, while he works out every single day and having some breakfast with his brothers Mike, played by Stanley Simons, as he's the youngest, as well as David and Carrie, who's out in the military, and later on played by future Bruce Springsteen, coming up in that biopic that I'm going to review, Jeremy Allen White, whom the audience will meet later in the movie. And I like this family quite a bit as characters, as they feel like a relatable brotherly family. The Von Erichs go to church as Kevin and David pick up Mike and get something to eat and get out of the lake, and has an upcoming match against Gino Hernandez and Bruiser Brody as his partner, and is remained a mystery to the wrestling audience as he goes on the TV to an interview where he's going to teach Gino and Brody to quit running their mouths about their family for way too long. And we get to the match, and Kevin and David go to the wrestling plant and go through over the wrestling plan from Gino and Brody, excuse me, and begin their match and eventually win the match. And the cinematography is well shot. It is very well done, as this movie is very well made. Kevin signs autographs to every single girl in the arena, including Pam, played by Cinderella herself, Lily James, as I'm still looking for a role to relate to her to other than the live-action Cinderella remake. Maybe Baby Driver, but I have yet to see Relay. I hear it's very good as well as intense, as she asks Kevin out on a date, and he accepts and have themselves a lunch date as they get to know each other, and he explains how he wants to be with his brothers, while Pam wants to be a vet and have a family of her own, as one of his brothers, Jack Jr., who was killed as a child, and he brings up the Von Erich curse, as he feels like his family is fucking cursed, and he doesn't believe in curses, he doesn't believe in curses, but he believes in luck. And Pam hugs Kevin, and the acting by Zac Efron and Lily James were just powerful, as they pull off their Texas accents quite well, in my opinion, as she doesn't believe in both curses and luck. And Kevin gets home to Fritz, telling him he has a match against the NWA World Heavyweight Champion of the world, Harley Race? Yeah, Harley Race. As we see both go on the TV to wrestle each other, and at the one point, Harley Race puts Kevin on the hard ground, instead of the ring, and he eventually gets back in, and he does get back up, and it takes him a while too, and Kevin wins by disqualifying Harley, as he throws the referee out of the ring. And the wrestling scene is brutal to watch at times. And one thing as a nitpick, I noticed was the sound editing when Kevin was on the ground and was off, and it comes back on like a snap of a finger, which felt a little bit weird to me, in my opinion. After the win from Kevin, Fritz is disappointed that Kevin was stuck on the hard ground for a little while, and he thinks hopefully he'll get his rematch while David wouldn't let Kevin talk while he was trying to help him out. And we move on to the next day at the football field at gym class at school with Carrie, while the Special Olympics boycotts Carrie's hopes to competition moves back home. And the screenplay is very well written, as this is reminding me with a minor difference of the trailer of the UFC biopic that just came out that stars Dwayne The Rock Johnson, called The Smashing Machine, which I hope I review, but we'll see what happens. And hopefully it'll get a Best Picture nominee so I can review that thing, as I was getting vibes from the trailer of that movie. And the funny thing is, they're both coming from the studio A24. The family plays a little game of football and have a picnic with Fritz and Doris, refusing Mike to go on a music tour. When the nighttime comes, they sneak out to take Mike to his music tour, as Fritz says sports is the best thing for his family, while Mike wants to be a musician. And I'm like, let the guy become a musician. Let him follow his own dreams. As Kevin, David, and Carrie take him there and have a good time with Kevin and Pam have sexual intercourse in the truck. And the next day comes as Fritz forces Carrie to wrestle in the ring while his brothers that felt forced. And as far as the editing goes, this is sort of a long movie, as maybe 10 minutes of it could have been in the editing room floor, in my opinion. Carrie joins Kevin and David in the wrestling ring and wins match after match as they win championships of tag team championships. As we move on to Carrie putting steroids in himself, and after seeing the movie Him, that Jordan Peele produced film, which I must say was a fucking terrible film, and we move on to 1980, I don't want to see any more of that shit. And we move on to 1983, where Kevin, David, and Carrie fight another 3 tag team wrestlers, as Fritz gets David to fight for a title match against Ric Flair without Kevin and Carrie. And this movie does a great job at telling a point of view of there were times I was getting vibes from a movie I've reviewed not all that long ago, Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler, as that was a great thing as well. The wedding of Kevin and Pam occurs while David is getting sick and needs to see the doctor, which is something Kevin says to him, but he refuses, and Kevin confesses he didn't take the match with Ric Flair very well, and he says to David Pam is pregnant, and he's going to become an uncle. While everybody dances, Fritz and Doris are happy for Kevin and Pam, as Fritz and Doris go outside because they don't have to worry about getting each other pregnant anymore. And we move on to hearing news about David dying in his hotel room in Japan, which was where he was going to fight Ric Flair, as Fritz doesn't want Kevin, Carrie, and Mike wearing sunglasses while not shedding a tear, while Kevin gets a letter from David before his death. And I felt so bad for them, as I felt tears coming out of my eyes at this moment, as it was that effective. Fritz and Kevin and Carrie, which one of them is going to wrestle Ric Flair, and as it turns out, Carrie wins the coin toss and fights Ric Flair and wins the match and gets his little belt, his title belt, title belt. And he celebrates by going out to have some fun until he gets into an accident and gets himself injured and had crutches, as he puts some cocaine in his system, while Kevin wants to change his baby's last name to add Kiss-on legally, as we get Kevin and Carrie practice their wrestling, and it's all because of their curse, right? I'm just going to say it now. And we get Kevin and Carrie practice their wrestling skills, as Mike is in a match and gets injured himself in the middle of the match to get him some surgery, and he's in a coma, and this is becoming depressing of a movie. Kevin is on the phone with Pam, as he should have stopped the match, but he tries to calm him down, as he begins to be depressed, and he's forced to hold his child Ross. And we move on to Kevin and Mike in a wheelchair doing a press conference. Mike is in a wheelchair doing a press conference about how he's feeling, and we suddenly move on to a match between Carrie and someone who looks like Ric Flair, while Kevin doesn't get tagged in to wrestle him. And the more life goes by for Kevin, the more depressed he is, as we see Carrie has a missing leg and tests it out and can't run with a missing leg, as Mike sees some old photos with Doris, aka his mother, and he confesses he wants to be a musician while his father forced him to wrestle and takes too much fucking pain pills while drinking beer. And correct me if I'm wrong, but medicine and alcohol don't mix well while Kevin and Carrie practice wrestling each other, with Kevin pushing Carrie down as he begs him to get up, but he can't do it on his own. As for the actor Jeremy Allen White, he does a great job in this role as as in this role he's in, as hopefully he'll pull off Bruce Springsteen. And I'm hearing like it's either mediocre or bad, but I'll get there next time. Well, not next time, but next month. Mike decides to go to heaven on his own as before his funeral. Doris can't wear the dress she had for the funeral, and after the funeral, Pam begs Kevin to come home as he's afraid of baby Ross getting the family curse as he practices in the ring as hard as he possibly can. And I'm noticing as this movie goes on, something I brought up, which is sometimes the sound editing is terrible. As we get on pre-interview on the TV with Ric Flair, talking smack about the Von Erich family, and the match begins with Kevin being on fire at the match, beating up on Ric Flair, and uses the Iron Claw against Ric Flair, and Kevin gets disqualified at the match, but loses the match, and has a chat with Fritz of Carrie about what the fuck happened out there, as he's depressed. And again, this movie is depressing, but not super depressing. Well, maybe it is, but The Whale is more super depressing, which is also something I reviewed from Darren Aronofsky recently. But this is obviously a better film than that was. Kevin comes home and sees Ross growing up as, I believe, a 7-year-old. Kevin is nearly 49 years old and has no choice but to stop wrestling and get themselves a house because they can't fit it in the apartment anymore while the boys are watching Carrie on the TV in the WWF. As Fritz compares Carrie being better than Kevin in front of Kevin and Pam as well as their kids, while Carrie gives Fritz a gun for Christmas, and Fritz doesn't want to shoot the gun after getting it for Christmas. And the acting is amazing, I'll say. Carrie calls Kevin in the middle of the fucking night, confessing he's in pain and he needs family to take care of him, and is considering dying after how much pain he's in. And Carrie eventually hangs up the phone and calls Fritz to tell him they've got to help him. But for some fucking random reason, Fritz tells Kevin they need to take care of things on their own, as Carrie gets home and commits suicide at a tree in their property. And Kevin almost kills Fritz to death because of his upsetness, as the audience sees Carrie shot himself with a gun he bought for Fritz, with Kevin putting Carrie on the table. And we see Carrie put before his death taking a boat ride out to the lake, and he sees in his imagination David and Mike and Jack Jr. and hug it out as they join each other in heaven. And Kevin says his goodbyes, to Carrie. And we move on to Kevin owning a gym that Fritz tries to buy from him, while Doris says she's painting as she didn't make dinner because she's not hungry. And that sounds like depression. As we move on to the next morning with Kevin and Pam waking up until their two sons, Ross and Marshall, wake them up and play in the background in the backyard. And Kevin says to the boys that he doesn't have brothers anymore, as he cries about it, how he lost them throughout the film, and play the game of football. And we get the biopic word saying in 2009 that Von Erichs got in the WWE Hall of Fame, as well as Kevin and Pam have been married for 40 years with 4 kids and 13 grandchildren. And the climax was depressing, but at the end of the day, this was a very good movie with a wrestling heart. But how much heart? Let's talk about it. I'll give this movie a 8.5 out of 10. I like the characters quite a bit as characters, as they feel like a relatable brotherly family, as Zac Efron and Lily James deliver absolutely powerful performances with their Texas accents quite well, and the cinematography is well shot and well done, as this movie is well made. And the wrestling matches were sometimes brutal to watch, but one little nitpick I have is about one of the wrestling matches, and sometimes throughout the movie, is sometimes brutal to watch. But anyways, there are scenes that have terrible sound editing, as the sound was at first but was first off, but the sound goes back on like a snap of a finger, and that was a weird place of sound editing choices, in my opinion. The screenplay was well written. I was getting vibes from a minor difference of an upcoming A24 movie like this, but it takes place in the UFC called The Smashing Machine, which I think looks very good, and it's sort of a long movie, and 10 minutes of it could be in the editing room floor, in my opinion. And I was also getting vibes from a recently reviewed film, Darren Aronofsky film, The Wrestler, as that was a great thing. There were times this movie was making me shed tears, and it was depressing as it was that effective. And this is a solid recommendation for the movie, as Jeremy Allen White does a very good job in the role he's cast in, and hopefully he pulls up Bruce Springsteen in that biopic coming up soon. And I'm hearing as far as it's mediocre versus bad, but at the end of the day, this is a very good movie with a very wrestling heart. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this review, and until then, pain is the best teacher.